All right, so in this video, we're going to do just a general overview of algae and plants. All right, and in the second video this week, we're going to be looking closer at the plants. So, just some central questions to start us off. We want to be able to identify the major characteristics of the plant kingdom. The kingdom Plantae is how we say that. We want to make sure that we remember photosynthesis. I know we've already talked about it this year, but we're just going to touch on it again. And we want to be able to distinguish between the three different types of algae. So what are plants? All right. Well, we know that plants are eukaryotes. They have a cell wall that's made of uh, cellulose. All right. We know they have chloroplasts, and they're going to be multicellular organisms, and they're going to be autotrophs. Remember, this means they are going to make their own food. All right. That's very important. Now, when we say they make their own food, another way we might identify that is the word a producer. All right. Again, they do have chloroplasts. That's what these green little structures are here. These are chloroplasts, and chloroplasts are the organelle, and chlorophyll is the pigment. So this is a color molecule. And the pigment is actually what is going to absorb the energy from the sun. And the one that we're most familiar with is chlorophyll. But as we'll see in a moment, there are more than one type. There is more than one type. Now, we do know that plants have a cell wall. That cell wall is rigid, and it has a cell membrane right inside. So the cell wall is right outside the cell membrane. It's going to support the plant. It's going to help hold it up. It's going to help protect the plant from damage, since, obviously a plant can't run away. Now, something that's really important that we kind of remember from back when we talked about, let's see, when was that? We talked about it in organelles when we talked about transport, right? Talked about hypertonic and isotonic and hypotonic solutions. So just to kind of remember that and connect it to plants, we can talk about something called turgor pressure. So turgor pressure is the water pressure that pushes the cell membrane out against the cell wall. And it kind of bows the cell wall. It kind of gives it this shape. And that turgor pressure like holds out against the cell wall. Now, that's not a tremendous amount of force coming from one cell. But when you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of cells all pushing out on the cell wall, what you end up with is a rigid stem of a plant, right? It can hold itself up. It's strong. Now, if you don't have enough water in the cell, you end up with the cell membrane pulling away from the cell wall, which you can see right here in this left picture. In that case, plasmolysis occurs, and the cytoplasm pulls away from the cell wall. You lose that turgor pressure, and you end up wilting. All right, so if something is wilting, that means it needs more water. All right, that's what's going on there. Now, photosynthesis, something we talked about. We talked about the energy cycle of plants. And this is the photosynthesis equation right here. If you don't remember it, take a good look at it, jot it down. All right, it takes CO2 in the form of a gas and water in the form of a liquid, and it makes sugar in the form of a solid, and it makes oxygen in the form of a gas. Now, obviously, they're also going to need some minerals from the ground that they're going to take up to survive. And in order to do that, they need to have roots with some special tissues, okay? Now, let's see here. Sorry about that. I lost my train of thought. Now, if we compare plants to algae, okay, we're going to see a couple differences that stand out. Now, we're also going to see some similarities. So, similarities first. They are photosynthetic, right? Algae is photosynthetic, but we're going to find them in streams, ponds, lakes, swamps, oceans, etc., right? In bodies of water. You may find them on a damp tree trunk. You may find them in really moist soil. For the most part, you're going to find them in water. Algae can be unicellular or multicellular. Now, that's different from a plant, which is going to be multicellular every time. And that does mean that algae, though, can range in size quite dramatically. So the giant kelp is an enormous algae, where, some of the blue-green algae that floats in the sea is single-celled. Adaptations in algae that are a little different from plants are the thin leaf-like structures that don't have waterproof coverings. So there's no cuticle, that's what that's called, and the fact that many of them don't have stems or roots. Now, this is a picture of the giant kelp. You can see this diver here um, is exploring there. Now, giant kelp are really important to the ecosystem. They kind of provide a habitat underwater for fish and otters and a tremendous number of species. But they are an example of probably the biggest algae. Now, the light the pigments that both plants and algae use to capture light energy and transform it into sugar vary from species to species. Oh, I dropped my pen. Hold on. Chlorophyll A is the pigment that absorbs light mostly in the blue, violet, and red regions of the spectrum. Chlorophyll B absorbs light mostly in the blue and red regions of the spectrum. And if you're a plant, you really just need the the chlorophyll pigment that's going to give you the best energy capture on a sunny day. But if you're underwater, you have to think about the fact that water absorbs energy as the sunlight passes through it. And it usually absorbs red and violet wavelengths first. And so if water is absorbing all of the energy that chlorophyll A and B is going to generate for you, then what does algae need to do in order to still be able to generate energy by photosynthesis, but also live underwater, right? I mean, it seems pretty obvious. We need a different pigment. And so if we look here at this graph, I'm going to move my face out of the way, we can see that the wavelength of light for some, like this would be for the blue, right there. So this blue wavelength of light, we're getting quite a bit of energy. But then when we get over here in the green section, we're not getting a whole lot of energy. We're pretty slow. That explains why you see that as a green color. It's absorbing the blue, it's absorbing the yellow and the red, but it's reflecting the green, and so we see chlorophyll as green. Now, water is going to absorb most of that energy, and so they've got different chlorophylls that will absorb different wavelengths. So there's chlorophyll A, there's chlorophyll B, there's chlorophyll C, there's even chlorophyll D. They also have accessory pigments, so extra pigments that are going to help the algae absorb even more of that light. So green algae has chlorophyll A and B. That's why it's green. Brown algae has chlorophyll A and C. It also has an accessory pigment, which causes it to be kind of brownish. Red algae has chlorophyll A, and they all have the phycobilins, which are accessory pigments that are really, really effective at absorbing blue light. Now, as you go down in the ocean, you'll notice that the water, right, kind of turns to bluish before it goes dark. And so since blue is one of those last colors that still penetrates through the water, the red algae are able to live at pretty significant depths, which is, interesting there. So what's the takeaway here? The color of the plant or the color of the algae rather, is going to determine how deep underwater it can live. That's the big takeaway. The color directly depends on which pigment is present in the algae. So here we can see a red algae, a brown algae, red or brown, could be red, could be brown, red-brown algae. The Sargasso Sea is right here. That's what it looks like. It has a bunch of this floating algae in it, which is pretty cool. Why is it pretty cool? Right? I said it's pretty cool. Why is it pretty cool? Well, this region is a phenomenal habitat for baby fish, eels, all kind of stuff. The eels, the freshwater eels that are pretty famous in the northeastern part of America, are pretty. One of the things I find pretty cool about them, pretty fascinating, is they are freshwater eels. So they're born in a specific stream up here in, say, somewhere in New York. And as they mature, they leave the stream, they swim all the way to the Sargasso Sea, and they live there for a while. And then they swim all the way back, and they actually go to the exact same spot back where they were born, and they make new eels, right? So that's what they do. And New Englanders have been catching those eels for a long time, and they're a pretty important part of the diet up there until modern times, and they're even good today. I've had smoked eel from the Northeast. It's pretty good. Now, algae are often called grass of the sea. They're really important to us, right? They're not just habitats for, baby fish and, those eels. We use them to make medicines. We use them in high blood pressure medicine, in arthritis medicine, in ulcer treatments. We actually put algae in ice cream. It's one of the thickeners in ice cream. We put it in pickle relish, in salad dressing, in chip dip, syrup, eggnog, toothpaste, hand lotion, all kinds of stuff. And in the science classroom, we actually use byproduct of algae to make agar plates. So that's a pretty useful little set of species there, the algae. So hopefully you can identify some major characteristics of our plant kingdom, things like cell walls and what the cell wall is made of, which sugar. The photosynthesis equation would be a good thing to know there for number 2. And hopefully you can distinguish algae from other algae based on its color. All right. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll be glad to give you guys a hand.